Elias Tucker massaged his temples as the boarding confirmation chimed on his comm band. 36 hours of emergency repairs on the Ganymede outpost had left him bone-weary, his engineering uniform still stained with coolant, and his eyes gritty from lack of sleep. The last thing he wanted was to spend the 8-hour journey back to Europa Station, wedged between arguing merchants in economy class. "Seat reassignment available," the transport's AI announced cheerfully. "Premium cabin D14 available for upgrade passenger Tucker." Elias didn't hesitate. He swiped his credit allocation across the scanner and trudged through the gleaming corridor toward the premium cabin. At this point, he'd pay any price for a quiet corner and a reclining seat. The cabin was nearly empty when he entered, a blessing after the crowded outpost. He collapsed into D14 without looking around, sighing as the ergonomic cushions adjusted to his frame. "It's you," came a melodic voice beside him. Elias turned, startled from his near doze. The passenger in D15 was watching him with enormous, luminescent eyes the color of a nebula, deep purple with flecks of silver. Her skin had the pearlescent sheen characteristic of Lunari, with delicate gill-like structures pulsing along her slender neck. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, struggling to focus. "You chose this seat," she said, her translator giving her words a musical quality. "Of all possible seats, you chose the one beside me." Elias frowned. The AI offered an upgrade. Is there a problem? "A convergence," she whispered, pupils dilating until her eyes were almost entirely black. "After countless orbits of waiting, a true convergence." Something about her intensity made Elias shift uncomfortably. "Look, if this seat is reserved for someone else." "No," she interrupted, reaching out with six-fingered hands that hovered inches from his arm. "It was meant for you. The threads of the cosmos have aligned." She regarded him with reverence that made him deeply uncomfortable. "I am Vila Naylan of the Seventh Spiral. Our meeting was written in the void between stars." Elias had encountered plenty of aliens with unusual beliefs during his 5 years as a deep space engineer, but something about this Lunari's certainty unsettled him. "I just switched seats for some quiet," he explained gently. "Nothing cosmic about it." Vila's gill structures fluttered in what he recognized as amusement. "The greatest convergences always appear as simple choices. That is their beauty." She settled back, apparently satisfied. "You don't believe now, but you will." The transport hummed to life beneath them, and Elias decided to let the matter drop. The Lunari were known for their spiritual interpretations of coincidence. He'd be back on Europa Station soon enough, never to see this strange alien again. As the ship lifted into space, Elias drifted toward sleep, barely registering Vila's whispered words. "The stars have bound us now, Elias Tucker. Where you walk, I must follow. What threatens you, I must face. Our convergence demands nothing less." In his exhaustion, he didn't question how she knew his name. That realization would come later, along with the understanding that his impulsive seat change had altered his fate in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. 3 days after returning to Europa Station, Elias had almost forgotten about the strange Lunari woman, until he spotted her across the mess hall, watching him with those unsettling nebula eyes. "That's impossible," he muttered, setting down his coffee. Immigration protocols on Europa were notoriously strict. The chances of Vila securing clearance so quickly were virtually non-existent. Yet there she was, gliding between tables with ethereal grace, her pearlescent skin luminous under the station's artificial lighting. She wore the traditional Lunari robes, now iridescent fabric that seemed to capture and release light with each movement. "Engineer Tucker," she greeted, as if their meeting were the most natural thing in the universe. "You've been working in Section 7 all morning. The nutrient balance in your system is suboptimal." Elias stared. "How do you know where I've been working, and what are you doing on Europa?" Vila tilted her head, gill structures rippling. "I follow the convergence. Where you are, I must be." She pushed a strange fruit across the table. "This will restore your electrolytes. The maintenance accident depleted them." "What maintenance accident?" His comm band chimed before she could answer. "Tucker to Section 4, emergency protocols initiated." Vila's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "Do not go through Corridor B," she said urgently. "Take the service tunnel instead." Something in her intensity gave him pause. "Why?" "Because in 17 minutes, a pressure valve will fail in Corridor B. Those within its radius will suffer severe respiratory damage. Elias pulled away. That's ridiculous. Those valves were inspected last week. Nevertheless, he found himself taking the service tunnel, telling himself it was simply more direct, not because of her warning. 14 minutes later, his comm band erupted with emergency alerts. A pressure valve in Corridor B had catastrophically failed, injuring 2 technicians. When he finally completed the emergency repairs and returned to his quarters, Vila was waiting outside his door. "How did you know?" he demanded. "The convergence allows me to see threads of possibility where they concern you," she replied simply. "Your path and mine are intertwined now." "That's not possible," Elias insisted, exhaustion making his voice sharp. "You can't predict the future." Vila's expression softened. "Not all futures, only those that touch yours now." She stepped closer. "The convergence is rare among my people, Elias Tucker. Most live entire lives without experiencing it. I have waited 7 orbital cycles for this connection. Look, I don't want to be rude, but this is getting strange. I switched seats on a transport, that's all." "Is it?" She tilted her head. "Then how did I know about your sister Amara? How she gave you that scar on your wrist when you were children? How you still send credits to her children, though she hasn't spoken to you in 8 years. Elias felt his blood turn cold. He had never mentioned Amara to anyone on the station. "Who are you really?" he whispered. "I am exactly who I claim to be," Vila answered. "And I am bound to protect you, whether you accept our convergence or not." That night, Elias couldn't sleep, his mind racing with impossible explanations. By morning, he had convinced himself to report the situation to station security, only to discover that, according to all official records, Vila Naylan had full clearance to be on Europa station, approved weeks before their chance meeting on the transport. "She's stalking you," said Miko, Elias' fellow engineer, as they calibrated pressure regulators in the station's east quadrant. "I've heard about this. Lunari have this concept called soul tethering. Once they decide you're their cosmic match, they never let go." Elias adjusted a dial, watching the readout stabilize. "She's harmless, eccentric but harmless." "Harmless," Miko scoffed. "She followed you into a restricted area yesterday. Commander Phillips is furious." Before Elias could respond, his supervisor's voice crackled over the comm. "Tucker, my office, now." Commander Phillips was a severe woman who ran Europa Station with military precision. She did not look pleased when Elias entered. "Engineer Tucker, your companion is becoming a security risk. 3 violations in 2 weeks. She accessed environmental controls yesterday claiming she needed to purify your working atmosphere." Elias winced. "Sir, I've tried explaining." "I don't care about your personal entanglements," Phillips interrupted. "Fix it, or I'm reassigning you to the Neptune outpost. 6-month rotation, minimal contact with non-essential personnel." The thought of spending 6 months on the isolated Neptune outpost made Elias' stomach turn. "I understand, sir." As he left Phillips's office, Vila materialized beside him, seeming to step out of a shadow where no shadow should exist. "They wish to separate us," she stated, her gill structures flat against her neck, a sign of distress Elias had learned. "This has to stop," he said firmly. "You're endangering my position here." "The convergence cannot be denied." Her voice had taken on a resonant quality that made the air vibrate. "I have seen what happens if our paths diverge now. Darkness, pain, death. You can't just—" "I invoke the right of shadowing," she announced, loud enough that passers-by turned to stare. "Let all witness that I claim protection rights over this human according to the 7th Accords of Interspecies Cooperation, Section 12B. A chill ran down Elias' spine. The 7th Accords were real, a treaty that granted certain rights to species with verified parapsychological abilities, if Vila could prove her claims. 2 days later, Elias found himself in a formal hearing, stunned as Vila demonstrated prediction after prediction of minor events around the station. Maintenance failures, communication glitches, even the exact words of crew members entering the room. "The Lunari abilities are well documented," stated the mediator from Xenological Affairs, "and the right of shadowing is recognized under current interspecies treaties." Commander Phillips looked ready to explode. "So this alien can just claim one of my engineers because she switched seats on a transport." "Not because he switched seats," Vila corrected. "Because in doing so, he fulfilled the first convergence pattern, There will be 6 more before our paths are fully aligned. Elias felt the ground shifting beneath him. His simple desire for a comfortable seat had somehow trapped him in an alien ritual he barely understood, with legal implications he couldn't have imagined. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. The mediator looked uncomfortable. According to the Accords, the shadowing rite gives Vila Naylan proximity privileges for 30 station days, after which she must demonstrate that separation would cause quantifiable harm. As the hearing concluded, Elias realized he was no longer in control of his own fate. Whatever cosmic game was being played, he had unwittingly become a central piece on the board. 3 weeks into Vila's officially sanctioned shadowing, the impossible happened. Europa station began to die. It started with fluctuations in the primary oxygen generators. Then gravitational stabilizers failed in 3 sections simultaneously. Within hours, the station was running on emergency power, with critical systems failing faster than the engineering teams could address them. "It's as if someone is systematically attacking our life support," Miko gasped as they raced to reroute power to the medical bay. Elias had barely seen Vila for days. She had become increasingly withdrawn, spending hours in meditation in her assigned quarters. Now, as alarms blared and emergency crews scrambled, he found himself wishing for her unsettling predictions. The deck lurched beneath them. "Structural integrity compromised in sections 3 through 7, announced the AI. "Evacuation protocols initiated." "That's the central hub," Miko whispered. "If that goes." "Everyone dies," Elias finished. Europa station housed over 800 personnel. He was halfway to the evacuation point when realization struck. Vila had predicted this. Not specifically, but her warnings about darkness and death, if they were separated, suddenly seemed less like manipulation and more like a terrible foreknowledge. Against all logic and self-preservation, Elias turned and ran toward the Lunari quarters. He found Vila in a state he hadn't seen before. Her pearlescent skin had turned almost translucent, violet energy crackling along her gill structures. She was suspended in midair, surrounded by swirling patterns of light. "Vila," he shouted over the alarms. Her eyes snapped open, entirely black now. "The convergence reaches its 4th pattern," she said, her voice overlaid with harmonic tones. "You came to me, though every path suggested you would not. The station is failing. We need to evacuate." "No," she lowered herself to the floor. "The station is being consumed by parasitic microorganisms engineered to target specific alloys. They were introduced 17 days ago by one who wished to eliminate evidence of their activities." Elias stared. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I am Naylan," she said simply. "The seers of the void, we do not merely predict, we perceive the threads of causality itself." She approached him, placing her 6-fingered hands on either side of his face. "This is why the convergence matters. My abilities extend to those I am bound to." Under her touch, Elias gasped as visions flooded his mind. Microscopic machines devouring critical components. The saboteur's face clear in his mind, and most shocking of all, the exact sequence needed to neutralize the threat. Together, they raced to the Environmental Control Center. Working as one, they synthesized a countermeasure that halted the microscopic destroyers. When security apprehended the saboteur, exactly where Vila had predicted, even Commander Phillips was silent with awe. Later, as the station slowly returned to normal operations, Vila finally explained the truth. "My people rarely leave our world, but those of us born with the deeper sight are sent out to find our convergences, beings whose minds can join with ours to expand our perception. Without you, I could see possibilities. With you, I can influence them." "So this was never about fate," Elias said, feeling both relieved and strangely disappointed. "It was about recruiting me for my brain." Vila's gill structures fluttered in that now familiar expression of amusement. "The universe is less binary than humans perceive it. Yes, I sought a convergence, but the specific convergence, that it would be you, that was written in the void between stars long before either of us existed." 1 month after saving Europa Station, Elias stood at the observation deck, watching the distant sun illuminate Jupiter's swirling clouds. Beside him, Vila's skin reflected the gaseous giant's colors in shimmering patterns. "The final convergence approaches," she said softly. You've accepted the first 5 patterns, only one remains. Ilias no longer doubted the reality of their connection. In the weeks since the crisis, he had experienced increasingly vivid shared perceptions with Vila. Sometimes he would catch glimpses of her homeworld, twin moons hanging low over iridescent forests, structures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. More remarkably, he had begun to develop precognitive flashes of his own. Nothing as profound as Vila's abilities, but enough to know when a circuit would fail before diagnostics detected any problem, or what words someone would speak moments before they uttered them. The final pattern, he repeated, will it bind us permanently? Yes, her gill structures pulsed with anticipation. But unlike the others, this one requires mutual choice. The convergence cannot complete without both beings embracing it fully. Commander Phillips had approached them 3 days earlier with an unprecedented offer: joint leadership of a new interspecies initiative focusing on predictive maintenance across the outer solar system. The position would make use of their unique abilities while giving them unprecedented freedom to travel between stations. And if I choose not to complete this final pattern? Ilias asked, already knowing the answer in his heart but needing to hear it from her. Then our abilities would eventually separate again. The glimpses you've experienced would fade. I would return to my world and you would continue your life here. Her voice remained neutral, but Ilias could feel the sadness rippling through their shared perception. He turned to face her fully. Over the weeks, he had come to see beauty in her alien features: the luminous eyes that contained galaxies, the graceful movements of her 6-fingered hands, the way her gill structures fluttered when she laughed at his human idioms. More than that, he had come to treasure the intimacy of their mental connection. Physical attraction had developed later, as they discovered the surprising compatibilities between their species. Their first kiss had triggered cascading visions that left them both breathless and laughing at the cosmic absurdity of it all. When I changed my seat on that transport, Ilias said, taking her hands in his, I thought I was making a simple choice for comfort. I had no idea I was setting in motion something that would change my entire existence. The greatest patterns often begin with the smallest choices, Vila replied, her eyes shifting to that complete darkness that signaled her deepest emotions. That is the paradox of predetermined fate. We choose it freely. Ilias smiled. Then I choose this, I choose us. Whatever final pattern completes the convergence, I'm ready. Vila's skin began to glow from within, threads of light extending from her body to his. The final pattern is the simplest of all, she whispered, moving closer until their foreheads touched. The acknowledgement of truth that neither of us is complete without the other. As their minds fully merged for the first time, Ilias experienced the universe as Vila saw it, infinite possibilities branching in all directions, each choice creating new patterns, new realities. He saw how truly improbable their meeting had been, how countless factors had aligned to place him on that transport, tired enough to upgrade his seat, at exactly the moment Vila had been searching for her convergence partner. When they separated, something fundamental had changed. Ilias could feel Vila's consciousness as a gentle presence alongside his own, not intrusive but complementary, like discovering a sense he never knew he lacked. So what happens now? He asked, though he could already perceive multiple answers unfolding before him. Vila smiled, her gill structures rippling with joy. Now we truly begin. The universe has patterns even my people have yet to discover. Together we might perceive them. As they turned to watch Jupiter's eternal storms, fingers intertwined, Ilias marveled at how a simple seat change had led him here, to a future he could never have imagined, with a being he never could have envisioned, and abilities he never knew existed within him. Some might call it destiny, others cosmic coincidence. But in this moment, watching the play of light across Vila's luminescent skin, Ilias preferred to think of it as the most fortunate mistake he'd ever made.